Eli Turner wakes up to a familiar hiss of water, but something sounds off. It's coming from the wrong side of the barn. The early September sun hadn't yet crested the horizon, but the light was soft enough to cast long, sleepy shadows across the pasture. Briar Glen was quiet at this hour, just the rustle of oak leaves, the occasional lowing of cattle, and the rhythmic creak of the old windmill. Eli sat up slowly, his joints making their usual complaints, and reached for the worn denim shirt folded neatly on the cedar chest at the foot of his bed. Coffee came first, always did. He made his way to the kitchen, where the percolator on the stove had already started its steady bubble. As he poured himself a mug and stepped out onto the porch, the sound returned. Closer now, steady and out of place. He took a sip, eyes narrowing toward the barn, then toward the spigot near the rose garden his late mother had planted decades ago. The hiss of water wasn't just from morning dew or irrigation. He walked the gravel path in his boots, the crunch underfoot, a rhythm he knew by heart. The rose garden, though slightly overgrown, still bore vibrant shades of dusty pink and ivory. His eyes landed on the spigot. A hose was attached, one that didn't belong to him. It snaked through the fence slats, cleverly concealed behind stacked hay bales. The nozzle had been propped open with a small rock, letting a thin stream of water dribble into the dry dirt. He squatted, inspecting the connection. It was a fresh coupling, shiny brass. Not his work. His hand brushed the edge of the hose, cool from the water inside, and a flicker of irritation passed through him. As he stood, the scent of the roses mingled with the memory of his mother's voice. "Always protect your land, Eli. Folks forget where boundaries are when it's convenient." He exhaled slowly, letting the smell and the words settle. He wasn't one to get worked up over minor things, but this wasn't minor. At Betty's diner later that morning, the bell above the door gave its usual jingle as Eli stepped inside. The place was filled with the aroma of sausage gravy and biscuits, the kind that stuck to your ribs until supper. Barb, the waitress with hair that hadn't changed since 1982, waved him to his regular seat by the window. "Morning, Eli. Coffee's already on your table." He nodded, tipping his hat in thanks, and eased into the vinyl booth. The diner was humming, locals exchanging weekend plans and cattle feed tips. Then came a voice from the next booth, low but not low enough. "They say Karen's got her niece's wedding all planned out. Big outdoor thing, real classy, somewhere scenic." The speaker chuckled. "Wonder where she found that kind of view in this town." Eli's ears perked up, but he kept his face unreadable. He knew Karen Whitmore, knew her type, president of the HOA and proud of it, the kind who treated bylaws like scripture and acted as if her property line extended well past its legal limits. Back at the ranch, Mason was loading feed into the troughs when Eli pulled up beside him. "Hey, Eli," Mason said, wiping his hands. "You notice anything weird with the water this week?" Eli looked at him, sharp. "Why?" Mason scratched the back of his neck. "Tank's running down faster than usual. Thought maybe one of the valves was loose." Eli didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked around to the side of the barn, where the main meter sat bolted to a weathered post. He crouched beside it, studying the needle. Even at mid-morning it was spinning, not fast, but steadily. He stood up slowly. "Somebody's drawing off it," he said. Mason frowned. "Karen?" Eli didn't reply, but his boots turned toward the garden. That afternoon, with the sun riding high and the cattle seeking shade under the oaks, Eli followed the hose line. Monday morning, Eli spots folding chairs lined up just feet from his cattle gate, and none of them belonged to him. He stopped mid-step, his hand resting on the top rail of the fence, coffee forgotten in his other hand. The dew hadn't yet dried from the grass, and already 2 rows of white plastic chairs stretched in uneven lines along the back edge of his property, far too close for comfort. Some were even angled so guests could enjoy a direct view of his pasture. A few cattle stood nearby, curious, one chewing lazily on a sprig of hay, clearly unimpressed with the new seating arrangement. He set the mug on the fence post and walked the length of the property line. The boundary had always been clear. The split-rail fence his father built nearly 40 years ago, the old pecan tree that marked the corner, and the natural dip in the land just past the rose garden. Every inch was familiar. His father's words surfaced with a weight that pulled at the space between his ribs. Property lines are sacred, son. Let 'em blur once, they'll vanish altogether. Back at the barn, Mason was scooping feed from a tin bin when Eli approached, eyes narrowed. "Did you see the chairs?" Eli asked. Mason wiped his hands on his jeans. "Yeah, and a catering van was blocking the lower drive earlier. Figured it was more of Karen's magic tricks." "Trucks too?" Eli muttered. He strode back toward the gate, boots kicking up dust as he went. Halfway there, a delivery truck was already backing in, its rear wheels grinding into the edge of Eli's pasture, leaving deep ruts in the earth. Two men in polo shirts hopped down, laughing as they unloaded crates of sparkling water and stacked them under a rented tent. Eli didn't raise his voice. He never did. "Hey," he said, quiet but firm. "This isn't your land." The younger of the two paused. "Aren't you with the HOA?" "I'm with the property that truck just rolled over," Eli replied. They exchanged glances. "Talk to the planner," one of them muttered, and kept working. Eli walked back to the shed and pulled a roll of twine from the hook, along with a dozen wooden stakes. It wasn't much, but it would draw a line no one could claim they didn't see. He pounded them into the ground every 6 feet, forming a clear boundary that followed the legal plot exactly. When he finished, he stood with hands on his hips and let the silence settle in. That silence didn't last. A golf cart rolled up, bright blue with gold HOA decals on the side. Karen Whitmore sat at the wheel, lipstick too red for the morning sun, and clipboard in hand. Beside her sat the wedding planner, a younger woman with perfect posture and a nervous smile. Karen swung down from the cart like she was stepping onto a stage. "Eli," she chirped, eyes scanning the twine. "What's all this?" "Boundary markers," he said, without inflection, "just so there's no confusion." Karen stepped forward and plucked a stake from the dirt like it offended her. "Oh, come on, no need for theatrics," she said, waving it. "It's a celebration. Everyone benefits from a little community spirit." The planner murmured something about setup flow, then bent to pick up another stake. Eli didn't move. "You're trespassing," he said, "and you're damaging my property." Karen waved a hand. "No harm, no foul. The grass will grow back. It's one weekend." Eli looked past her to the corner of his rose garden, where 2 volunteers were dragging an ice chest dangerously close to the fragile plants. One wheel hit the edge of a brick border and skidded sideways, nearly tipping the chest over. He turned to Mason, who'd been watching silently from the gate. "We could always hook the hose to the manure tank," Mason said under his breath, "just for laughs." Eli raised an eyebrow, but a slight curve touched the corner of his mouth. "No," he said. "Not yet." Just then, a white Lexus pulled into the cul-de-sac, and out stepped the bride and groom, Whitney and Brad, if Eli remembered right. She was young and glamorous, all blonde waves and pearl earrings. Brad looked like he was born in a golf club ad, tan, pressed, and mildly sunburned. They walked straight toward Eli. "Hi," Whitney beamed. "We're so excited. Thank you so much for letting us use your land. It's just perfect." Brad extended a hand, which Eli ignored. "I didn't let you use anything," he said flatly. Whitney blinked, confused. "But Karen said—" Eli didn't answer. He turned and walked back toward the barn. By midday, the refreshment station was being installed, and it had spilled halfway into his rose garden. One of the hired hands had moved a folding table to what was clearly the other side of the fence line, and red drink coolers were being iced just inches from the nearest bloom. He clenched his jaw and picked up the phone. When the deputy arrived, his cruiser kicked up a cloud of gravel as he rolled into the property. He stepped out slowly, hat tilted low, notepad in hand. "Morning, Mr. Turner." Eli nodded. "Deputy?" "What seems to be the issue?" Eli gestured toward the fence line and the activity beyond it. "They're trespassing, using my water, driving over my land, setting up chairs on my pasture. I want it stopped." The deputy looked around, took notes, and scratched his neck. "I see. Thing is, unless there's damage, this falls under civil. You'd have to go through the county court." "What about the garden?" Eli asked, voice tight. "Still not criminal," the deputy replied. "Annoying, sure, but you'd need proof they knowingly destroyed something." Eli said nothing, but his eyes didn't blink. "You take it to court if it's that bad," the deputy offered as a half-hearted conclusion. "I can't do much more." As the cruiser pulled away, Mason walked up, holding a small box wrapped in brown paper. "Pick this up in town," he said, handing it over. "Wildlife cam. Weatherproof. Motion activated. Think it's time we started collecting proof." Eli took it in silence, then looked out toward the fence where the chairs now formed a neat semicircle. The property line was vanishing, 1 inch at a time. As the sun sets, Eli is in the barn, not tending cattle, but measuring hose fittings beside a sealed manure tank. The day had cooled just enough to draw a breeze through the wide barn doors, carrying the scent of hay and old oil. Overhead, swallows chirped beneath the rafters, darting through the last rays of gold light that slipped between the boards. Eli stood at the long workbench, measuring a brass fitting against the threaded cap of a thick black hose. He didn't look up when Mason walked in, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "It'll fit," Eli muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Mason peered over his shoulder. "Tank's still holding steady pressure. You sure we want to test it tonight?" Eli gave the fitting a final twist, satisfied with the snug seal. "If we're going to do it, we do it right. Quiet, clean, and no one gets hurt." They moved together toward the rear corner of the barn, where the old manure tank sat, sealed and bolted, its pump dormant for years. Originally part of a compost irrigation system his father had once dabbled with, it had since become more symbolic than practical, a remnant of an era when nothing on the land went to waste. Mason connected the bypass line, a coiled length of reinforced hose, and fed it through a narrow trench that ran underground toward the garden spigot. At the end of the line, just before the hose disappeared beneath the rose bushes, Eli had installed a compact valve box with a toggle switch hidden under a flat stone. It would only open if someone twisted the outdoor faucet again. A light clicked on outside, casting a wide glow across the barnyard. Both men paused. From beyond the fence, across the narrow stretch of Eli's property that butted up against the HOA's event lawn, string lights blinked to life, illuminating a DJ tent and rows of folding tables. A song test blared, a stuttering bass-heavy loop that echoed off the barn walls and sent Eli's cattle stirring nervously in the nearby pen. "I swear," Mason muttered, rubbing the bridge of his nose, "if they flash those lights one more time and blind the herd, we're going to have a real stampede." Eli didn't reply. He walked toward the door, gaze fixed on the fence line. Moments later, Karen strolled into view, clipboard tucked under her arm, her stride purposeful as ever. She paused at the edge of the property, just inside the light spill, then leaned against the fence like it was hers to lean on. "You planning on attending?" she called out, smiling thinly. "Big day tomorrow. Might be the fanciest thing to ever happen to your dirt patch." Eli stood in shadow, arms crossed. He didn't answer. Karen squinted. "Suit yourself. But don't go sulking when people talk about how this whole event gave your land some real charm." Then she was gone, her perfume lingering even after her footsteps faded. Back in the barn, Sergeant the Goat poked his head out from behind a hay bale, chewing on a piece of paper that had once been a shipment invoice. "Not now, Sergeant," Mason muttered, nudging him away with his boot. The goat snorted and trotted off, unimpressed. Eli knelt near the spigot where the hose had once been tampered with. Beside it now sat the wildlife camera Mason had installed that morning, mounted in a camouflaged casing and angled precisely at the valve. A small red light blinked every few seconds, motion-triggered, with date and timestamps burned into every frame. He glanced at Mason. "If they open it again, we'll have it on record." "You're really going to go through with it?" Mason asked, voice low. "I'm not starting it," Eli said. "But if they open that valve again, that's on them." Mason nodded slowly, then turned back toward the barn to prime the tank's pump. They opened the control valve and ran a test, just a few gallons. The hose hissed as liquid surged through it, bypassing the primary irrigation route and redirecting toward the spigot. Eli stood back, arms folded, watching for any sign of leak or failure. The valve held. The pressure gauge stayed steady. The system worked. They shut it down, resealed the connections, and buried the last section of hose under a thin layer of dirt and hay mulch. By the time they were finished, the moon had risen behind the oaks, casting silver across the barn roof and flickering in the trough water like spilled starlight. Mason tossed Eli a bottle of soda from the cooler and leaned against the barn wall. "Reckon they'll try it again?" he asked. Eli took a sip, watching the dark fence line. "They think this place is just empty land, an accessory. They don't know who they're poking." "Not yet." As night stretched on and the event crew wrapped up their final tests, Eli turned in, locking up the barn and checking the camera one last time. The red light blinked steadily, blinking into the dark like a silent witness. The next morning, as dawn cracked the sky in soft pastels, Eli stirred at the familiar sounds of birdsong and cattle shifting in the pen. But something new floated in with the breeze. Laughter, high-pitched and unbothered. A child's voice carried over the lawn. "It's not working, Mommy!" Then came a louder noise, unmistakable, the sharp metallic click of the valve being opened. A soft hum clicks on behind the barn. Then, without warning, a row of sprinklers erupts with brown sludge right in the middle of Karen's dream wedding. The sky above Briar Glen was a cloudless, pitiless blue, and the heat hung heavy at 92 degrees. Sunlight bounced off white chairbacks arranged in perfect symmetry across the shared green strip that edged too far into Eli Turner's land. String lights swayed gently overhead. A quartet played something vaguely classical near the buffet, and sweat rolled down tuxedo collars faster than the champagne was being poured. Eli stood just inside his barn, watching from the shadows. His shirt clung to his back, damp from the weight of the afternoon, but he didn't move. Through the wide doors, he saw the DJ test the sound system again, this time at full volume. The sudden bass drop made his cattle shift nervously in the pen, hooves crunching straw. Mason leaned against the stall, arms crossed. "You sure you want to be out here for this?" Mason asked. "I didn't do anything," Eli replied. Mason gave a short laugh. "That's the part I like best." Children darted between guests, chasing bubbles and rolling around the decorative lawn. One boy, no more than 6 or 7, was tugging at a strange metal cap near the base of the rose garden, the exact location of the hidden valve. He struggled for a moment, then twisted hard. Click! A soft hum began to build, so low it was almost imperceptible. Eli's cattle stopped chewing. Mason's eyes flicked toward the sprinkler heads spaced along the garden's edge. Then it happened. With a wet thwump, a geyser of dark sludge shot up from the first sprinkler, arcing high before splattering onto the corner of the gift table. Another erupted near the refreshment station, dousing the ice bucket and flipping plastic cups into the air like confetti. The decorative runner across the buffet was instantly ruined, soaked in a brown stain that dripped down onto the fried chicken and potato salad. Guests screamed. One woman tried to leap backward from the spray, but slipped, landing hard on the muddy grass. Children shrieked in delight and horror. The cellist from the quartet abandoned her post, lifting her instrument like a lifeboat. From his vantage point, Eli saw Karen turn sharply, her mouth open in a soundless cry, as the third sprinkler launched a jet straight across the seating area. A slow-motion arc of liquid landed across 3 white folding chairs and the pristine hem of the bride's gown. Whitney froze. For a moment, the only sound was the faint, persistent hiss of the system at full pressure. Then came the wail. "My dress!" Whitney screamed, grabbing at the stained fabric. "It's ruined! What is this?" Brad, the groom, was trying to shield his shoes from the puddles spreading beneath their feet, but one well-aimed splatter caught him in the chest. Karen, eyes wide, stumbled toward the valve. "Shut it off! Shut it off!" She slipped halfway there, her heel catching on a slick patch of grass. She hit the ground with a wet squelch, then scrambled on hands and knees toward the spigot, shrieking as the sprinkler system continued its assault. Eli walked forward slowly, stopping just before the fence. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He simply watched. Why is this happening?" the bride sobbed, clutching her dress. "Karen, you said this land was yours." "It is. I mean, technically." "For the event?" Karen yelled, now coated in mud and splashes of brown water. "It's a shared-use space." Brad turned on her, voice rising over the chaos. "You told us the owner agreed." A goat sergeant bolted out from the side of the barn, attracted by the noise and movement. He galloped toward the sprinkler closest to the buffet, misjudged the slippery grass, and slid belly first across the lawn into a champagne tower, toppling it with a dramatic crash. The sound of glass shattering was the final straw for some guests, who began bolting toward the cars, heels sinking into mud, dresses flapping. Then came the voice that turned the chaos into something more. "Well," said Councilwoman Dana Reeves, brushing sludge off her sleeve. "I don't recall HOA events being allowed on private property. Certainly not with livestock involved." Karen spun around. "Dana, this is just a misunderstanding. We had verbal permission." "No, you didn't," Eli said, stepping forward now, holding a small, weatherproof box in one hand. "You never asked, and you sure as hell didn't get permission." A deputy arrived moments later, his cruiser nudging aside parked cars along the narrow HOA street. He stepped out and took in the scene. Muddy guests, a sobbing bride, Karen still on her knees near the valve. "Who called this in?" he asked. "I didn't," Eli replied. "But you might want to see this." He handed over the wildlife camera. "Motion triggered. Time-stamped. You'll see when they opened the valve and how they accessed the spigot without consent." The deputy nodded, holding the camera carefully. "We'll need a report, and someone's likely looking at a civil suit." Karen, her hair matted and dress-streaked, turned toward Eli, face contorted. "This isn't over, Turner." Karen walks into the HOA emergency meeting, still damp, hair frizzed, blouse stained, yet tries to sit at the head of the table like nothing happened. The fluorescent lights in the Briar Glen clubhouse hummed overhead, their cold white glow casting a washed-out tint over the laminated floor and neatly aligned folding chairs. The room smelled faintly of burned coffee and floor polish. A silver urn in the corner sputtered, dripping into a stack of styrofoam cups no one had touched. Board members sat in stiff silence, hands folded, faces unreadable. Some wore neutral expressions, others looked down at their notes, but a few couldn't help glancing toward the door as it creaked open. Karen strode in with forced confidence, her heels clicking against the tile. The ends of her hair curled upward from the humidity of yesterday's fiasco. Her white blouse bore a faded smear of what looked like buffet mustard, and a streak of something darker stained her sleeve. Despite this, she pulled out the high-backed chair at the center of the long table and sat like she'd just returned from a successful fundraiser. "I believe we can call this meeting to order," she said brightly, stacking her clipboard on the table like a gavel. No one spoke. Roger, a balding man in his 70s who rarely said anything above a mumble, cleared his throat. "There's a concern about yesterday's events." Karen offered a tight smile. "Yes, and I'm glad to address it. We were in the middle of a joyful community celebration when Mr. Turner, who is not a member of this HOA, took it upon himself to sabotage." "That's not what the footage shows," someone interrupted from the left. Karen's smile faltered. She turned toward the voice. "Margie, one of the longtime members." "Excuse me?" Margie didn't back down. "We saw the wildlife cam. Eli never touched that valve. It was a child, on our side." Karen stiffened. "But it was his setup. He engineered it to fail." Across the room, a man in a pressed blue suit stood, his face flushed with quiet fury. Whitney's father. "My daughter's wedding was ruined," he said, his voice low and precise. "You told us this land was secured, that it was community property, that the owner had given verbal consent. We have thousands of dollars in damages, and guests demanding answers." Karen tried to speak, but he held up a hand. "You took our money, misrepresented the venue, and then allowed this entire spectacle to collapse under your lies." From the back, another voice. Roger again. "You told us you had Eli's permission." Karen looked around, her eyes darting from face to face. I didn't think he'd mind. He's never said anything before. I thought he'd appreciate being included." "He filed no complaint until you broke the boundary," Margie said, "and the footage proves it." Karen stood, gripping the back of her chair. "We've all benefited from my leadership. I've spent years cleaning up this community, raising property values, hosting events. Don't act like I haven't given my all." A murmur spread across the table, not of agreement, but unease. "And now," she added, voice tightening, "you'd all throw me out because of one misunderstanding?" No one answered. Roger cleared his throat again and pulled a folded sheet of paper from his folder. "There's been a motion," he said slowly. "A vote to remove you as president, effective immediately." Karen's mouth opened. "You can't be serious." Eli stepped forward from the back of the room. He'd been standing by the wall, leaning quietly, hat in hand. His shirt was clean, pressed, his expression unreadable. "I never gave permission," he said calmly. "Not for the land, not for the water, and I kept my distance until y'all started lying in my name." Karen turned to him, wild-eyed. "You've always hated me." "No," Eli replied. "I've always hated what you think power gives you permission to do." Karen's voice trembled. "Roger, don't forget the help I gave your wife last year with the HOA permits. And Margie, what about the holiday lighting exemption I pushed through for your grandkids?" But no one spoke for her. Roger unfolded the tally sheet. 12 votes to remove, 2 abstain, 1 against. He placed the paper on the table. "It passes." Karen didn't move. Her fingers tightened around the back of the chair. Slowly, she looked up, eyes finding Eli across the room. "Enjoy your moment, old man. The real fight's coming." Eli didn't flinch. "Only if you're foolish enough to come back." Eli places the final private property, no trespassing sign along the newly reinforced fence line, hammer echoing in the cool morning air. The breeze was light but steady, rustling the edge of his flannel shirt as he stood back and inspected his work. The new sign hung square between 2 cedar posts, just beyond the reach of the rose garden. The fence, taller now with added rails and barbed wire at the top, stretched the length of the disputed boundary, firm and unapologetic. He adjusted his cap and let the weight of the hammer fall into his side pocket. Chickens scratched beneath the porch steps nearby, pecking at unseen grains in the dust. From the kitchen window, the scent of brewing coffee drifted out, blending with the cool earth and the familiar hum of insects just beginning their daily chatter. From the old wooden radio mounted near the barn door, a voice crackled through the morning static. Local update. HOA President Karen Whitmore has officially stepped down amid mounting complaints and an internal investigation. Sources say a temporary board has been installed while bylaws are reviewed. Eli didn't react. He walked back toward the house, boots silent on the gravel. Mason was already on the porch, 2 mugs in hand. He handed one off wordlessly as Eli settled into the creaky rocking chair facing east. Across the street, 2 neighbors, faces he'd known for years but rarely spoken to, lifted hands in tentative waves as they passed by on a morning walk. Eli nodded back, calm and unreadable. A gray SUV pulled into the driveway a few minutes later. Mason narrowed his eyes until the driver's door opened and a well-dressed man stepped out, holding a manila envelope. It was Whitney's father, looking far less furious than he had at the emergency meeting. "Morning," the man called. Eli rose slowly. "Morning." The man approached, clearing his throat. "I just wanted to drop this off. Cleanup fees, legal expenses. It's a check and an apology." Eli took the envelope but didn't open it. "Wasn't expecting that." The man glanced at the fence. "I wasn't expecting my daughter to cry through her wedding either." Eli gave a faint nod. "Fair?" They stood in silence a beat longer than necessary. Then the man extended a hand, and this time Eli took it. "Take care, Mr. Turner," he said, before turning back to his car. When he'd gone, Mason let out a low whistle. "Now that's something I didn't have on my bingo card." Eli settled back into his chair, sipping coffee. "Sometimes people surprise you." "Think they learned their lesson?" Mason asked. Eli shrugged. "I didn't do it for them. I did it so I could sleep." Mason chuckled. "Fair enough." Later that afternoon, after the chores were done and the sun had dipped lower behind the trees, Eli walked out to the rose garden. The petals were fuller this week, somehow untouched by all the chaos that had brushed so close to them. He knelt slowly, joints stiff, and opened the nozzle of a brand-new hose, one he'd bought himself. Water arced gently into the soil as he moved between the rows, careful not to spill too much on the leaves. For a long while he said nothing, just listened to the rhythm of the water and the hush of the wind. Behind him, hooves clattered lightly on the porch boards. Sergeant the goat strutted into view, tail flicking proudly, as if he alone had secured the land. Mason appeared with a rag over his shoulder, grinning. "Think we should add a sign. Trespassers will be fertilized?" Eli smiled without looking up. "Might put that on a t-shirt." On that quiet morning, as the last sign went up and the fence stood tall, Eli didn't feel triumphant. He felt at peace. The land was safe, not through anger, but by standing firm when it mattered most. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It's a line redrawn, a truth defended, a neighbor who finally waves back. In a world that often forgets boundaries, a well-kept fence and a steady hand can still speak the loudest.